to dive into Mean It, um, what really well, there's lots of things that grab me about this tune, but I love particularly the lyric. There's violence in silence, and the ability to paint this huge picture with just a few words like that. And I'm wondering, is that a line that just comes to you, or did you have to kind of finesse that a little bit?
No, I mean, it actually was pretty natural. I think that we all know, we've probably all experienced that where it's like when you don't talk about, the elephant in the room, it can cause,
Mm,
it can turn into a much bigger elephant, I guess is the way to put that. But yeah, that was just kind of a lyric that naturally came about because, it really said exactly what I was trying to say in that moment.
okay. And I mean, also building on that, how have you changed as a lyricist over the years?
I don't know, like, I I strive to always be a better writer and communicator in general. So I'm always reading books on lyric writing, on poetry. Um, Walt Whitman's "A Poet's Purpose" has stuck with me.
Hmm.
For 20 plus years now. Obviously, he was a Cavalier poet, so that came about way before that. But
Yeah.
he says, the poet's purpose is to put themselves in the listener's place before the listener, or the reader rather, before the reader is even there. And I'm not saying I'm some poet or anything, but that's kind of always stuck with me. So when I'm writing from personal experience, I write from personal experience, but there are a lot of times where I'll have an idea and just run with it and, kind of think, well, like, what if a person is going through this? What would be the next steps? Or, sometimes I'll write inspired by film or
Hmm.
TV. So, um, I think as a human, I would hope that we have an ever expanding vocabulary. Um, so I think that, with that comes me just wanting to be a better communicator and writer always as well.
Right. Have you ever read Stephen King's book on writing?
I haven't, which is funny. That's probably about one of the only books of his I haven't read.
Oh, okay.
When I was a child, I lived across the street from our city's public library. So when they would get an overabundance or surplus of books and needed to make shelf space, they would literally just throw books out to the curb.
Oh,
And we would get to walk over there before the garbage trucks came that next week, and I would get to go through and take any books. So I've read almost every Stephen King book.
wow.
The Talisman is actually one of my favorite books of all time, but I have not read. I know the book that you're speaking of. I mean, it's literally like an instruction, almost an instructional book, right? Just
Yeah, it's part autobiography, and part this is his approach to
yeah.
writing.
Yeah,
But
I've never checked that out actually, no, but I
oh, okay. Yeah, and I mean, it is he has some great lines in there, and something that applies to actually as you started this conversation, where he has this line that says, "If you don't have the time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write," which, I thought speaks to exactly what you
I like
just said.
that,
And then another great line that, you know, I think you can hear in a lot of your lyrics is he talks about people. He said, "Throw out your thesaurus." Like he said, if don't try and think of some clever way to say something if it's not how you would say it naturally.
mhm.
And it seems, although you have these cool turns of phrase of there being violence and silence, it all seems like things that you would utter in conversation.
Right. Yeah, I mean, naturally, when you're trying to rhyming scheme, sometimes that's gonna lend itself to, maybe some words in a phrase that you wouldn't necessarily say. Because obviously, if you're having a conversation with someone, you'd be like, "Hey, I think when we don't talk about it is when it gets worse, not there's violence and silence." But
You're right. Yeah.
that's, I guess, just a part of songwriting in general. But, um, yeah, I will say, you know, uh like, just to touch on, if you don't have time to read, you don't have, writing's not for you, or whatever his quote was. I think
Yeah.
that's probably a little dated just because of how fucking awesome film is, nowadays. There's so much sauce in movies and TV now that I think can be beyond inspiring. And as far as like the source part, the only time I bring a
Yeah.
thesaurus in the mix is if I feel like, well, I've said that word a lot in these other songs, and I think that's
Uh,
probably to my own detriment. Like I do that too often to where I'm telling myself, well, you've already said this. I feel like I've always been a big critic of myself in that regard. Um,
mm,
you know,
yeah.
written over 100 songs or more
Hmm.
in your lifetime. You start to think, well, did I already say this, or can I say it in a different way? And I don't think anyone else necessarily thinks about that shit except for me. Uh, my bandmates are always like, "Come on, man, no one's gonna." So yeah,
Right.
um, that's the only time that that the source is dusted off.
Yeah. But no, I think it also speaks to a certain level of quality that you're searching for and a certain work ethic that you have, that you're trying desperately never to phone it in,
Mm.
even if that means no one else will notice, but I'll notice. And, it seems like maybe you're someone that pushes yourself constantly.
Yeah, I mean it's all these little things with the songwriting for me. And I think I'll fall on the sword here. I am solely the reason that we do not have more albums in almost 2 decades spanning career. And that's because a lot of times I am like, well, I feel like I've already said this way on this song. Little shit, like, again, stuff that I know that no one's thinking about, but like when too many when too many rhyming, like the actual rhyme is like me or you. I hate that.
Yeah.
That's why there's so many damn songs, but it's like that doesn't. No one else is thinking about stuff like that. It's the listener, at least, isn't like listening to a song and be like, man. Because I'll tell you, when I was a young kid and Hybrid Theory came out by Linkin Park, I was like that about that album. I was like, man, every chorus is like me, 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 me. Guess what? Multi-platinum album, so no one gave a
Right.
shit except for me.
Yeah.
So, I think that's just something I've gotta get over, but, yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't wanna say I take it too seriously, but, when it is, like, your baby,
Hmm.
if you will, like, yeah, there are little things that I tend to be my biggest critic on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also as a listener, that's kind of the thing I've always thought was cool. I know, sometimes the muse kicks in and you just write something instantly, but I also appreciate the times that people really put in the sweat to try and make something a little bit better and fine tune and and all that kind of stuff. And you want to believe that the artist cares about it as much as you end up caring about it. So yeah, so I certainly get that. Um, but along the lines with Mean It, I read that you said in another interview that you sat on this song for 2 years. First off, why?
It was just not the right time, where we were in our career, business relationships with, other people and a former label now, and knowing that we wanted to ultimately start our own label and start self-releasing everything for the first time in our career. So it just became, one of those hard to keep secrets where we're like, well, we can't put this out yet until the
Hmm.
timing's right. But yeah, and then with that, I think we were wondering like, all right, so after this song, are we doing another single, or are we going to record a full length? So just not having the answer to all those questions as well led to us again sitting on it a little longer than I think what we anticipated when I first recorded this. Because I recorded this, I might even had the timeline wrong when I said that in the other interview. I think it was summer 2023 is when this
Okay.
song was completed. Then we did the video in the summer of 2024, and then we put it out in
Just
first quarter of 2025. So
yeah.
yeah, um, pretty wild. And I will say, at the time when we tracked this, it just felt like, yo, this is like the strongest like rock single in the history of our band. I feel like, and I didn't sit down and try to write a single. I was
Hmm.
writing a song, and I can honestly say that I feel this is the, if you will, weakest song on this EP. So it's a pretty
Really?
awesome feeling to have, after sitting on it for a
Okay.
couple of years, and just what you continue working on, you feel like, you're just leveling up each time. But I truly feel like that's where we are right now.
Wow. Well, it would seem to me the temptation would be, again, as you level up and then you've had this one in the bank for a while, the temptation would be, oh, well, now we've reached this level. Let's go back and re-record this because, maybe we can make this even better. How do you let go, especially during all that time when it's not even being released?
Yeah, you can't do that just because then you'll get caught up in this whirlwind of doing that with every song. I feel like, God knows our first album, there's so much shit that I would do differently. If I were to record that album, 18 years older than I was, when I was just a
Yeah.
child recording that. So yeah, I think that we're afforded these opportunities now in music nowadays, that you can always do like re-releases later, and your fans will dig that and think, oh, a different version of this song's cool. Which we've done that with a couple songs from our, early albums. So yeah, I mean, I say weakest song. I still think "Mean It" is a very, very great song. If I'm allowed to say that. Uh,
Right.
I just it's a to be able to hang your hat on the fact that you really believe that that is, that there are 4 other songs on the EP that are better than that. I think that that's a statement that speaks to where we are right now.
Yeah. And then the video, how much input did you have into what that concept was? Because it's a very arresting visual experience.
Yeah, man, I've got to give all the credit to David Dutton on that. I've tried to be as hands-on as possible with our music videos throughout our career. That said, I've also been extremely fortunate to work with just like geniuses in that space. Mason Dixon did all of our early videos, and we couldn't make it work with him this time just due to scheduling. But David was a mutual friend, and or someone that we knew from a friend rather, and reached out. The introduction was made, and we sent him the treat or the song, and he sent us back a treatment. And I will say, at first we weren't a huge fan of the idea and direction we were going. Um,
Mm,
and when we gave that, initial pushback, he sent over this idea that we knew a lot of it was just going to be, hey, we got to trust him, and in editing, and visually what he sees for this. And I looked at his reel. I was obviously very familiar with his previous work, and I was like, yeah,
hmm.
man, I mean, this is why the guy gets paid the big bucks. Let's
Right.
do this. So um beyond just location ideas, this treatment, that was all David Dutton, and he knocks it out of the park, especially with a lot of the post stuff.
And, given the topic, the theme of the song, um, it does seem to mesh well. Sometimes you people make a video and it's like, well, this doesn't quite fit the song, or it's something completely
Yeah,
different and changes the meaning. This one, it seemed to mesh well, and again, it's a very visceral visual experience that leaves you off balance.
mhm.
But it seems like the point of view of the singer in this particular story is this is a person that's off balance and constantly on the verge of tipping over. And so it's cool that it captures that, but I'm also wondering, as someone that's obviously experienced this, how do you write yourself when you've gotten into those off kilter moments?
I would say most of the time I'm guilty of it being reflective thoughts, um, writing about it, after it's already happened. Um, I think, there's certainly been times where when I'm living in that uh, space, I can write about it. But I also feel like, depending upon what, like, the actual issue or subject is, that if I live in what write about it when I live in it, it kind of just I'm immersed in it too much at that point. If that makes any sense at all. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, a lot of times it's just reflection. Um, And that could be either a good thing or a bad thing, I guess, depending upon how you look at it.
Right, right. Also, another interesting aspect, particularly with this song, is compared to your earlier work, the lower register when you're singing the verses, when you're a little deeper with your voice, it has a little bit more weight, a little bit more gravity to it. Um, and that's obviously just because of the natural evolution of a person's voice. But if you go back and forth between, let's say, this and criminal, um, there's a little bit more I don't know, it just strength to that bottom end. And I'm wondering if how cognizant you were of that and if you write to that fact now.
I don't think I was cognizant of that at all, so I appreciate you
Oh, okay.
pointing that out, Chris. But no, I mean it's funny because like a lot of times I'm critical of myself of being in that register too much.
Hmm.
But I would say as far as what your ears are hearing, that could be just a number of things. It could be was my voice tired that day? Was my voice tired on the stuff in the past? The microphone,
Hmm.
the producer and engineer. I naturally have a very deep voice, so I think, like you said, maybe some, especially over the last 10 years or so, just extra use of being in that register might lend itself to that. But no, I don't feel, any more than any other register really that I'm like performative anymore in that register than I would be anywhere else. If I guess it's the best way to say that. It's yeah, I just got a low ass voice, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. Or maybe it just stands out a little more because in a lot of the band's past work, and as with this one, the choruses are always this massive force that just hits you dead on, and you're clearly, you know, giving it and expressing it intensely in those moments, and so that's been consistent. And so maybe it's just in contrast to that, I really tuned in this time to, what it sounded like in those quieter verses.
I think
Uh,
also just the dynamic of bringing everything down at the same time
mhm.
probably amplifies that a little bit too,
Yeah, yeah. Um, and in the video, it just shows you guys as a four piece, but it sounds like there's some sort of keyboard or synthesizer that's adding to that wall of sound with the opening of the track. What did you use for that effect?
Yeah, there are, strings in that. There are some synths, just getting creative in the studio,
Hmm.
a number of different VSTs. And, that was most of that was Richie Viconda, who was, you know, a big part of, the direction of where this band has really started to go in the last year. Met Richie initially working, I was featuring on a track with a band down in Texas, and he was the producer on it. And we just clicked, man. It was like, it was like I'd been working on music with him for years.
Hmm.
So we did a couple songs. We did Say Less and Mean It with Richie, and that also went like so badass that he's here right now. He even went out and did this tour with us. There were dates that
Okay.
Nick couldn't do, and Richie filled in on guitar. And Richie he plays drums in a band called Fire from the Gods. Um, just an incredible mind, someone that I think also always a positive energy in the room. Maybe
Hmm.
when I'm in my head too much, he's one of those people that's I think it's easier for him to pull me out of it than maybe bandmates because it's a voice that's newer than the guys that I've been doing this with for a while now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we did the entire Flowers EP with him, and like I said, we're right now the tour just ended 2 days ago. We are in
Hmm.
Traverse City, Michigan. Spending this week writing and recording a couple other new songs before we go play Sonic Temple this Saturday, and Richie's here for that.
Okay. And I'm always curious when you come across musicians that connect in that way, as you've said. how do you guys usually communicate your ideas? Because some people are, they sing it or hum ideas, or some they have this kind of shorthand vocabulary where they're making different musical references to this band, that artist,
Yeah, yeah.
whatnot.
I I think it's
How
a
do you?
combination of all of that, really.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
very guilty of, "Yo, that riff reminds me of X band. What if we did this to it and made it like X band, and then we
Hmm.
put us on it, so then it's naturally just gonna sound like Framing Hanley," or, "Oh, that part's cool, but what if we went dun-dun-dun-dun, dun, dun-dun-dun," it's like, I don't think that there's ever a guideline for, like, this is the way that we operate. Um,
Right.
you know, God knows, I've in the 18 years I've been doing this, there's a lot of FH songs that started off with me, butchering my way through a chord structure. And there are a lot of songs that instead was me because I'm not some amazing guitarist. I would hum the melody of the music.
Hmm.
Like, it'd go like this and send that voice memo. And then I'd have my melody over top of that melody that I also had in mind instrument wise that I'm just not good enough to play. So yeah, it's always different. I think that's what makes creating so fun is like there's never some it's got to be this way or this is the only way that it works for us. And that's what also again, made adding Richie to this puzzle just so natural because he flows just like we do.
Okay. Yeah, and don't knock humming,
Yeah,
because one of the bands I work with is a blues band called the Fabulous Thunderbirds. And Kim, the lead guy, is known as this great harmonica player. And he talked about when he was getting started and he, worked with guys like, Muddy Waters and all these people.
yeah,
He would come up with riffs and hum riffs into a recorder and then learn how to recreate that on the harmonica. But he felt that that was kind of a key to developing his own sound, so he wasn't just copying licks from other people. So, I think it's very cool that you do that as a way to express, all right, this is what I'm hearing in here, and let me convey this to the guitarist this way.
yeah. I mean, it's melody. That's my mo. So it's like I'm gonna hear it so many different ways, and sometimes there might be a part that I think sounds like a guitar part and then it ends up being the vocal instead or it ends up being the vocal as well. um,
Hmm.
or maybe sometimes it just doesn't work, but yeah, I can't ever just
Yeah.
turn that off anyway, so when I'm hearing it I'm going to communicate it.
And then one of the kind of fascinating aspects to the Framing Hanley story is you stepped away from the band. The band took a break for 2 to 3 years. And not only did you step away from the band, you stepped away from music, from what I've read. Um, what I'm interested in is how did that time away influence the musician you've become?
I mean, I can't overstate how much. At that point in my professional career and life, I just lost the passion for music. I think it became like a rat race where we were trying to write hit singles, to appease some label instead of writing, with the same. I don't want to say that like those albums have songs full of passionless songs or have album. Yeah, I don't want to say those albums are like just a collection of passionless songs, but hopefully I'm getting across my point here. Is like it didn't feel as pure anymore, and I was making music because it was my livelihood and it was how I took care of my family, not because it was a form of therapy or the passion that I had had since I was a child anymore. So
Mm,
when my kids started school, my oldest was he started kindergarten. I was like, man, I don't want to miss you know my kids' lives being gone 200 plus days out of the year
yeah.
doing something that I feel like I'm doing for the wrong reasons anymore. And that was definitely tainted by the business side of things, and I think just relationships with maybe some of the people that I was working with at that time. And when I will say when I gravitated back to music, it was for the right reasons. That break was
Mhm.
so necessary, um, not just from a professional standpoint, but also just as a listener. The music that I started getting more into and listening more to during that break, I think really put an emphasis to me on driving home the importance of the storytelling again, and remembering, this is why I was doing this, to tell
Mhm.
stories. And Jason Isbell, was the biggest piece of that. Was
Hmm.
when I picked up a guitar again, I was going to do Americana, like singer songwriter stuff, and then naturally the gain volume, or the gain started
Yeah.
getting cranked more and more until I was like, "Yo, I'm writing Freeman Hanley songs again." But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be here having this interview with you right now if I wouldn't have stepped away for that period. It was so vital.
Hmm. But and then it is also fascinating. I love that when I talk to professional musicians, it's they always have this uh, um, very eclectic uh, sense of the music that they love. It's never just oh, whatever lane that they're in. And so I think it's very cool that Jason Isabel and the 400 unit and that vibe you know was influential to you, but it's still cool to hear how that comes out of you is not just a Xerox copy of something. It's it informs you, but it gets turned into your own sound.
Yeah, I mean, it really can't be a Xerox copy, because I would say three of the biggest influences on me musically in the last like 5 years are all from three completely different genres: the Jason Isbell, Childish Gambino, and Loathe. You've
Hmm.
got Americana, singer songwriter, country,
Yeah.
hip hop, and then metal. So it's like all three of those are, so it's not like I could, unless I'm just spitting out, you know, and that's not fair, because Noah Gunderson and Medium Build are two other ones that I would throw in there. But it's like, yeah, man, like I feel like just being a fan of music, it it's so necessary for creating and feeling like, that you're being true to yourself and your audience. The reason music is always evolving is because there is always a handful of artists that I feel like have such a stranglehold on, majority of listeners, that it does start to creep in and affect, and that's what slowly evolves and changes music in multiple directions, is because of that. And when you start talking about each individual musician pulling from their arsenal of, who they have favorite on their playlist, and you're talking about, that's what makes music so fun, and like, so like, for an art form that only has so many chords, it is always evolving. And the reason it
Yeah.
doesn't get stagnant is because there are always artists that find different ways to put a spin on it, and then that's manipulated by another artist that loves them, and then that, so yeah, I guess that's a a very long-winded way to say, like, if you are not a fan of music in your heart, I don't think how you can be, um, you know, a, an honest creator that's doing anything worth a damn.
Yeah. Right. And and it also speaks to a lot of the tension within the industry, because the industry likes to put people in pigeonholes and neat little packages, and you're a this artist, as opposed to a that artist. But it's like, well, they're human beings, so it's no, they're gonna wander
Yeah.
this way and that, but that's what makes things interesting, and
Yeah, to be at a point in my life and in my career to where it's like I don't have to create anything like anything anymore.
Mhm.
Framing Hanley is my brand, my business, my um, you know, my identity, if you will. And it's like, it doesn't have to sound like this because it's Freeman Hanley. It's gonna sound like this because I am Freeman Hanley. No matter
Yeah.
what, it's like if the music keeps changing, that's just a product of my life,
Hmm.
what I'm listening to, what I'm a fan of, what is influencing me. And, you know, quite frankly, and I've said this on other interviews, but this EP was called Flowers because it is one of those, like, it's about time we get our flowers. Like, I've been doing this for almost 20 years and we're not as well known as, a lot of other bands. And we show on this EP that there's not a lot out there that we can't do. I feel like
Yeah.
across every genre, we touch on it on this EP. And that's when it was like, wake up, like, give us our flowers because
Yeah.
we're fucking good at what we do.
Right. Right. I mean, but that had to be part of, at least I would think, that time of reset that you had away from it,
Oh, for sure.
was learning how to deal with this. Um, like, I feel lucky is because I do these interviews. I'm introduced to a lot of music that normally I wouldn't have if I was just, a casual listener. And so, a lot of the best stuff that's come out in the last year, I contend most people have never heard of, because it's not charting or any of that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. But people will say, oh, well, there's not much happening. And I'm like, well, no, don't pay attention to that
Right.
stuff that's on award shows and everything. There's some of the best stuff I've ever heard is being made right now, and it's fantastic, but you have to work for it. You have to dig for it. And that's my perspective as a music fan. How do you get to the point where, I mean, yes, you guys deserve your flowers, but how do you get to the point where you're like, okay, we don't have control over this. We're going to keep pushing anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest obstacle in all of this is truly not being able to, I guess, 100% have control on who even hears your stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Um, Meta has made it damn near impossible to even reach your customer base,
Yes.
people that like your page because they like your music. And then you can't put a post out there and reach even a fifth of them without
Right.
putting money behind it. And then there's no regulations or any committee that sits there and makes sure that the money that you are putting into it is actually, serving the purpose of what you're paying for.
Yeah.
Because God knows we've seen that in advertising, over the last year.
Right.
I'll tell you, anytime I make a post, I can make a post right now doing this interview and show you, like, an hour from now, it'll be, oh my God, you guys are still a band, you know.
Hmm.
At some point, you just have to accept, like, yo, we can only control what we control, and live on good faith, and good faith that, hopefully, if this music is as good as you believe it is, that it's going to reach those ears eventually. But again, I'm not doing this to make millions of dollars off of streaming or anything like that anymore. It's like I just I want to keep putting music out there because I think that there's a place for it. I think we create music that is worthy of being heard by masses. And if masses turns out to be 200 people in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that's it, then it's 200 people in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that's it. It's like I am I am getting a feeling from creating that I wasn't getting anymore back in 2014, 2015. And at the end of the day, it's like to feel something about the art that you were creating, I think is a reward in itself. To
Yeah.
find out that your music touches some people and means something to them, that's just icing on the cake, really.
Yeah. And I will say, as kind of maybe a bit of a desperate reach at optimism, but because I manage some online worlds for some other bands, and I do custom content for them. and I'm always telling them, don't look at the numbers because the numbers lie and they don't mean anything. And particularly for people like me, where I'm constantly talking to people and they'll say, oh, I loved this post by this band you work with or whatnot. And I'll say, oh, did you click like or anything? And they're like, no, because I don't,
Yeah, yeah,
they're burned on that. And the the tech companies do not know what to do with that. All they know how to do is count who clicks, but they don't know who really uh, absorbs what you're putting out there. And
so I'll
there's a
put it
lot
like,
more. Yeah, and there's a lot more people that are absorbing than they can even track.
I can't
Um,
tell you how, like, it's embarrassing to admit this, but we live in this day and age, where there's always these rushes of dopamine from your phone that it the instant gratification thing is a real thing that has affected everything in our lives. I can't tell you how guilty I am. And again, it's embarrassing to admit this, but if I get a text from a true dear friend that I haven't spoken to in like 6 months, and my fucking first reaction is, "Oh my god, I love this person. I haven't heard from them in so long. This conversation is gonna be great, but I don't have time for it right now, so I'm gonna get back to it and text them tomorrow when I've got
mm,
time." And then
mhm.
what happens? Tomorrow
Yeah,
comes, you forget all about it because so much other shit has happened between now and then that 2 weeks later, you finally see it and you're like, "Oh, now it totally seems to them probably like I don't even value their friendship or them as a human." It's like, so if we're doing that in our daily lives, yeah, dude, how easy is it to put off that band that's one of your favorite bands that you haven't heard some from in 10 years and they're in your city tonight? Ah, would have
yeah,
tickets now in case it sells. Like, but I don't know if my schedule is going to allow me to go, so I'll wait till day of. And then guess what? Day of comes, you don't even remember. Or man, the new episode of Squid Games just came out. Like, I gotta binge this season this weekend, so I've got to start this Friday night. Like, it's crazy. We could go on an hour long rant about just that. So it's like all these things that have stacked up against the music industry already, combined with just like where we are now in this day and age, you know, wanting that immediate gratification, loving short form content, not having 3.5 minutes to spare for a song anymore. It's
yeah,
wild, man. And like, it's scary because, I don't, who would ever thought when YouTube came about and started to become successful that we were going to be, how can we, you know, make our video 20 seconds long and get, you
right,
know, 10 times the views. Like, are we gonna get there with music?
right,
How can
yeah,
we get in and get out? How can we have a
hmm
30-second song that just grabs them and, like, it's crazy because none of us have answers to this, and I fear it's
no,
gonna get way worse with, where we're at with AI now. But, yeah, man, that's I could go on a long diatribe about all that.
right. But the little bit of optimism I actually cling to, which is ironic because I'm not an optimistic person by nature, is there are people like me, because I'm a humongous introvert, and so the idea of clicking or commenting on people I don't know, just doesn't register. And there's a lot of people out there like that, especially that grew up before the internet existed, where, and like one of the artists I work with, this New Orleans musician named John Papa Grow, when I was asking him about how he was gauging things, he said after we started working together, he said people were coming up after the show and asking me questions about things that we did posts about. And he said, I know they weren't clicking like, they weren't commenting or any of that kind of stuff, but this was like proof that, oh, these quieter people, they're out there and they're reading and they're watching and listening. And
Yeah,
so,
man, I just wish that you could really drive home to the average music fan, like, how much those clicks actually do matter still, you know?
hmm, yeah,
It's all
yeah,
algorithm shit, man. Like, I will say this right now, we released "Mean It." It was popping like crazy on Spotify. 2 weeks after the fact, or on all streaming services, 2 weeks after we release it, our former label decides to drop a deluxe edition of our album "Envy" that we put out in 2020, um, to not much fanfare because of the fact that the world shut down 3 days later. Um, but And then Spotify sees that's the new release. So now we've got to push this. And what happens to Mean It?
Yeah.
In this album that we put out in 2020 that now has a couple other new songs on it that aren't new because we released them over the last few years as singles, starts getting the push from the algorithm. And then it's like, it's a number. Everything is just a numbers game. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, it sucks. Those introverts that don't do that, or even the people that convince themselves they're too busy to do that, don't understand really how much that does matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
An
And then,
engaged fan base, man, is like something that I take for granted, that early on I didn't do a better job of just like responding. And because I was like you're saying you are, with seeing posts, I was like that as the author. I would
yeah.
post something, people would comment, I would take the damn time and read all the comments. And my dumbass, especially when I was younger and a kid, like I would usually only respond to the negative ones. Um, So, I know that our true fans that come out to shows and see us live know that after every show, I'm at the merch table hanging out. I want to shake hands with everybody that comes out and thank you for spending your money to come support rock and roll. Like I want to have that engagement. I just wish I would have done a better job over the years of doing it online, because now it's like online is what matters so much that it affects the chance to be able to have that engagement live in person.
Yeah. Yeah. But on the flip side, there's lots of people that are, eh, I can point to bands that have 1 million followers who can't sell a ticket to save their
Yeah.
lives. And I work with bands with maybe 70,000 followers who can fill a 500-seat venue,
Yeah.
and also, I'm the guy, I'm still listening to compact discs. I'm still buying vinyl because I love the sound quality and everything, but it's also, the tech companies can't measure that. So I'll listen into an entire album. They have no data on what I was listening to or how many times or whatnot. But I'm the guy who's going to spend money on the album, on the tickets, and all that kind of stuff. So again, it's a reach for optimism, but it's out there.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
I'll
So
try to be positive about that and optimistic as well.
So, anyways, I didn't mean to go off on that,
No,
and
no,
I've got hours more rant against,
same, same.
messes like Spotify and all that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Um,
mean, it's
yeah, which
I
are,
don't even think Spotify is halfway to what that's going to become. I think that they want to be a Netflix, a media app, and so I don't think we've
yeah,
seen nearly where that is going to get. I think that has potential to be the biggest company in the world, and unfortunately, Daniel and I are
right.
going to reap
Never
all
mind
of
that
that.
they're putting out generic music by fake bands that they
Yeah,
control, so and pushing it so they don't have to, they can hurt real musicians even more. But
yeah.
anyway,
It's happening,
um,
and it's going to be even worse at the end of this year.
yeah. So, but anyways, to wrap things up, because we kind of covered all of my stuff. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to talk about? Or, people always ask me about this, that, and the other, but I'd really like to talk about this for a change.
No, I mean, I think we touched on everything. We sound like a couple grumpy old men spitting in the wind.
Yeah.
But I again, like, to be doing this now for my entire adult life, um, and to know without a doubt, like, I am in my bag right now. We're creating the best art that we've ever created. Um, just in the feeling that I get doing that, like just how happy it makes me to be in a room writing again. I think that comes through in the
Mm,
music that we're creating. We just did this Flowers EP that was only available at shows, and I think that's because the plan is we're going to continue recording and put out a full length album later this year, and I cannot wait, for this music to be in people's ears. I'm so proud of it, and if that translates to becoming one of the biggest rock bands in the world, fucking awesome. If
all
it
right.
translates to having the same amount of fans this time next year, at the end of the day, it's like what matters to me is I truly believe in the music that we are creating now, and I know that there's a place for it, and if that means that's in my earbuds, it's in my
Yeah.
earbuds, but I'm having fun again.